Hello and welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I'm your host, David Polikoff. It's been 6 months. It is 2026. It's June. Took about 6 months off. A lot of things going on with the family. Son graduated high school, 25th wedding anniversary. Got a new boss at work, getting him spun up on stuff, budgeting at work. So there was a lot of things that were happening. Good things, stuff that I learned. It's always good to learn new things. Keeps me interested. So 6 months off. You probably have seen a lot of the here's three things. I've done some stuff like that throughout the month, the months leading up to that. But it's June, so I wanted to bring back someone that I've had on the show at least twice. I know at least once, but I think twice. Shelly Wheeler. Shelly is now a retired captain from Montgomery County Fire and Rescue. We can say that now because she's not going to get in trouble for saying where she was. Not that she ever was going to, but she's also Dr. Shelly Wheeler. She got her doctoral degree in organizational leadership, but I'm not gonna throw all that there. Shelly, welcome back to the show. Introduce yourself. Let's talk a little bit about the things that you've been doing since you have retired, and then we'll move on to our topic.
Yeah. Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me back. I always find this fun, and I love how organic it is. I retired in August. Yay. It's awesome. But I didn't retire. I retired to kind of do other things, to write, my husband and I have a consulting business that's taken off really well. The other part of my doctorate is in business as well, business administration. So I do a lot of organizational design and alignment, which works really well with leadership. And then that specialty is organizational leadership. So I stopped talking about leadership for a while because I felt exhausted, right? But, because it seems like hard to grasp. And to me, it's really not. And who am I to tell people how to lead, right? I think people look and go, well, what's their credentials or, her credentials or his credentials? But now I'm back into it. I'm going to start my own podcast and just start talking about leadership organically. Maybe helping other people. And when I do that stuff, I learn too. I'm sure you learn stuff, like you said, every day and every time you do something like that. So just been working on the house, running the business, writing, and life's good.
Yeah, and speaking of writing, you've written at least 2 books, maybe 3. I know a couple of children's books or one children's book, finishing up a children's book, but you also wrote a book, your leadership book that kind of documents your time in the fire service and what you've learned along the way. Let's talk a little bit about all 3 of those publications. And then at the end, in the description of the show, and if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be right down there where you can, go get a copy of her book, children's book, as well as her more serious leadership book. But talk a little bit about that before we jump into our topic, because I think it's pretty interesting. A lot of my friends are writing books now. I do have one in the hopper. I co-wrote a book with 2 of my friends that'll be coming out in the fall for Penwell Publishing. But a lot of my friends are writing books, and I was one of those kind. And I was like, I got to write a book. I don't know 90,000 words worth of shit to talk about, and you'd be surprised that what you come up with. But let's talk a little bit about what you've done with your writings.
Yeah. So one of the things I started with, I'm not bossy, I'm a leader. And that's my heart's passion there because it talks about a little girl who her mother's a firefighter and her dad's a Marine. I have 4 of those books written. I released the first one. And again, when I write something, I also write something with the context of like curriculum built behind it and what I want, people to learn from it. And then I wrote 2 more books that branch off to her little brother. And then I started figuring out how to do the books 100% on my own. So I wrote a couple other children's books that are getting ready to come out. I say that because I go back and forth with Ingram Spark and there's some intricacies. So one is called Bumble, a Hummy, and the Singing Flower. And it's, for younger kids, a little bit about the environment, which I'm working on another one about a plastic bag. And all of them have leadership undertones, though, and, being able to build relationships and work together. I wrote one about trip to the barber shop, which really focuses a little bit on autism. And again, a lot of leadership traits in it, the barber that listens and takes the time, like, unfortunately, as hard as it is, sometimes we need to do when we're leading. And then I have leading from the fire ground and beyond, which is leadership lessons for everyone. But that's where I tie in business, fire service, all kinds of different organizations, because it really does stay consistent. It's the culture that changes a little bit, that changes things. But it's based off of my dissertation, and I put it in a book form. And it's really from other people's point of views, firefighters' point of views. And then I kind of just talk about mine. I wanted to get a little different. I didn't want to say, here I am, I'm a great leader, look at me type thing. So I took a different approach. And I've learned so much from listening to other people and their leadership thoughts. And, and when I went through the fire service, it was from the most junior person to some of the most senior people across 5 different fire departments. So I put it in a book and, tried to make it to where you could read any one chapter at any given time and reflect. You don't really have to read the whole thing. And I'm currently working on another adult leadership book that's now my memoirs. So I like to do things foundationally. So, it's the Leading from Fireground and Beyond is my work, my study. And then the next one coming out is, why I chose to go into the fire service and things I learned from very young to now. So that's what I'm doing.
And I think, you and I talked offline a few minutes ago. We talked about the young people coming in. I know, I feel I don't like bringing feelings. I always like to leave with facts, but you see the younger people that are coming in. When I say younger, newer in the fire service, that don't have a lot of the leadership traits or understand how to be a leader. Starting them at a young age, reading children's book that have the undertones of leadership, with the intent that the parents that are either reading the book to the child kind of lay it out that this is what it means to lead, to take responsibility for your things, to help other people when you see somebody that needs help. All those foundational things, we need to get back to that. So when these young men and women come into the fire service, they have a foundation, and then we build on that in the fire department to teach, to start teaching people that these are the next lieutenants and captains. Even though they've got less than 28 weeks, they're still in recruit class, but understanding that, in 5 years, in 7 years, these may be the next lieutenants. Let's start those building blocks. And I think starting at a young age with anything and building it from there is important. So that's why I like seeing authors writing children's books that have the undertones of leadership. I know, I actually bought a couple of Jocko Willink's younger books, The Warrior. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Bought one for my son when he was younger to read it because it had that learning how to take responsibility and how to put your leadership skills to work, learning and then putting them to work, which is going to be the crux of what we're going to talk about today. And again, I will put a link to all of your books in the description. So people that have young kids that want to have this, to see what it is, have a book to read. I know when I was a young dad, or when I was a dad with young kids, my son just graduated high school. My daughter's going to be going into senior in college. We were always looking for books for kids to read, because we wanted to read to them. So having books that have educational value to it and not some of the garbage educational value that's out there now. Totally different conversation that we could go down a rabbit hole on that. But I think from a fire service perspective, a quasi-military perspective, and we all know that firefighters, the first responders, are probably one of the most respected positions, career volunteer in the country. So we don't ever want to lose that. So having somebody that has been rooted in that for decades, not only you didn't even talk about your military career. I think you retired from the Coast Guard. You did time in the Coast Guard, you and your husband. So you have that strong leadership background. And that's kind of where I want to jump into today, where we talk about the types and styles of leadership. And I'll tell a story that I've already told you twice, but I'll tell the people that are listening. When I was applying for a position, I had 2 different interviews. One was with a fire chief. The other one was with the county leaders, a county executive. And they asked one specific question that both of them asked identical. What's your leadership style? And when that was first asked of me, I kind of, cocked my head a little bit, and I'm like, that's a great question. I said, being in the fire service, the first thing that came to my mind is it depends. We were taught at a young age, well, there's 3 styles of leadership: the autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire is what you learn when you take your fire officer classes, things like that. But, talking with you and knowing you for the years that I've known you and coming through, there's dozens of leadership styles that branch off of each different style. So my answer was, it depends. It's situational. Sometimes things that happen require a heavy hand. Sometimes they require empathy. Sometimes they require sympathy. Sometimes you just need to listen to find out what's going on. And then you shift into your leadership mode to depending on what it is, if it's a discipline thing or if it's a helping thing. So there's no one answer. If you're a good fire department officer, that this is how I do. I am laissez-faire. I am a servant leadership, because it is different, because we are working with people that come with different personalities, different backgrounds, different races, different religions. So every style of leadership is situational. So let's talk a little bit about the styles of leadership that are common in the fire service that maybe people don't know about, and then maybe a quick definition for the people that are listening of what they actually mean.
Okay. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's over 65 different styles of leadership. When people were talking about the autocratic, democratic, liaison fair, I feel like that's more of a leader behavior. It was a general overview of how a leader might assert themselves. For example, if you're on the fire ground and you're with a crew you don't know as well, you may have to be very autocratic, especially if they're getting ready to, because we got to figure safety, risk management, policy, procedures, and it's your job as an officer, and it's really everybody's job to look around and make sure that everyone's being safe and doing the right thing. And when you don't know a crew, let's face it, you got to be more autocratic. That doesn't mean your style of leadership definitely like changes who you are in that moment. You still have those underpinnings of, maybe you're more of a servant type leadership. You talked about situational earlier, and I always say it depends. It is situational, and situational surprise is a leadership style theory. So when I did my dissertation and I was interviewing firefighters, my underpinning questions is like, how much do firefighters, whether firefighters or officers, buy into the situational approach, the transformational approach, and then the servant approach? So I literally looked at those three styles. And then I looked at Kouzes and Posner's 5 practices of exemplary leadership, which are kind of just behaviors and how you create a relationship with someone. And that's what I like about Kouzes and Posner, because it depends. It takes all those 65 plus styles and, the adaptability, which, is a leadership style. And it was amazing what I found in my study. Like everything that firefighters talked about, whether they were a lineman or a officer, was all those tendencies of what a transformational leader is, to encourage people to do better, right? When we go out and train, and you hold people accountable to the training, you're like, this is your weakness, or, so we're going to go out and we're going to pull a line, 15 times so you get it. And then you encourage them to do it and talk them through it. That's transforming that person. you know, uh, Situational. Well, it depends. Again, we had talked about this offline. You're going to treat that 20-year master who comes to work early every day and, has a great attitude and always shows up and mentors other people. And now you see something really different in their behavior, whether they're down or they're short. You're going to deal with them a little different than the newer person who shows up late every day and doesn't seem to be getting it, however that looks. Now, as a leader, do you have to figure out what's wrong with that person? Do they just not care? Because how we respond to them is going to be different. They either just don't care, or you find out that they have some issues at home with, a sick kid and you didn't know. So it's going to depend on how you handle that. That's why leadership is so situational. And in that situation, you change your style. And we talked about it. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Some people refuse to be led. And that's where that transactional style, like what's in it for me, that's not a great way for that person to be. And you're going to work over time to help bring them in as part of the team. But transactional might be the start to where you get it. Like, hey, what's in this for me? I'll tell you what's in this for you. You're going to be really good at your job. You say you're having trouble with, some of the other people. Well, if you start to do better at your job, they're going to respect you more because they're going to trust you, which is a pillar of leadership, right? So it just came across loud and clear. Even the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, firemen were just talking about it. They were. It didn't matter how many years of experience. They didn't know what they were talking about, but it mirrored a lot of those things. And again, it still depends. You're not going to just say, "Hey, we're doing these 3 styles only," but it does give you a strong starting point to say, within your organizational culture, here's 3 styles, and firemen like to be told why and why it works, in my experience. Maybe I should say firefighter, but, whatever.
we both agree that it's generic, you
It
know?
is, yeah, it's generic, and I'm writing about that in my memoirs, right? But, yeah, so it just really does depend, and but to have a foundation is important. It's like talking about going back and kids reading books, which reading to kids, parents reading to kids is down like 38%. I mean, we gotta get kids reading again, not just, because they learn things out of it, and so it's the same thing with in any organization. You come in, you give them some foundation of principle. You can't just expect that they got it at home. Can't even expect if they were in the military. A lot of times we're like, oh, they were in the military, they're good. And then you're like, what? So, because it does come down to that character and integrity thing, and as well. And that's where I say we got to be careful with hierarchy and titles of just calling people leaders or assuming that they can lead because they have done this. And I think that is the great man theory that still exists in us. We love stories, and we love stories of people that have done these great things. And then we automatically think they're a leader, and they write books and tell us what great leaders they are. And then you meet 10 people that worked for them and you're like, terrible. So, that's what makes it, kind of complex. But you're right. I mean, you can't say what's your leadership style. It does. It depends.
Yeah, and that's, even though, learning how to lead people, it's an everyday task. It's something that you constantly have to work with. It's not like, okay, I got it now. And because like we talked about, you're bringing in firefighters that are from all different walks of life. Some grew up, you know, didn't have much. Some grew up with a lot, different races, sexes, different upbringings. And so there's not one style that fits all, and it was, I don't know if I'd given the right answer when I walked away, but I felt comfortable with the answer that, well, it depends. I've used many different styles to talk to people because I've talked to many different people. And one of the things that you said is that firefighters talk about it all the time, even though they don't know what they're talking about in the educational world, that they're hitting a lot of those markers that people go to school to learn about. They've just picked it up as they have moved through the fire service. And they, even though they don't have a name for it, where you would look at that and go, oh, well, that's X, it's just something that they picked up along the way that worked for them for different situations. And we talk about how the different modes of decision making, whether you have that rapid prime decision making or that over time type of decision making, well, that rapid prime is recalling what you've done. I've done this before. I've been in this situation and this is how I handled it. So I'm going to move in this direction and then I can make adjustments. It's the same thing I feel for leadership is that, hey, I was in this situation once before. This is how I dealt with it. And if it doesn't seem like it's going down that road, I can make small adjustments. And it's funny because when you take a look at that from a high level, that's almost all of the promotional exams for the assessment centers when you're actually dealing with people, is there is some type of component of you need to solve a problem and then make decisions on that problem. And a lot of that is being able to talk to people and hear them and then offer solutions. And
Yes.
people know how to do that without knowing that they're doing that.
Right. Well, and so there's one thing, they're doing a lot more studies on, and it's the theory of followership. Because if you understand why someone's willing to follow you, then you understand how to lead them better. And that's where that experience comes from. Like you said, oh, yeah, like, you know, oh, I learned this, system one, system two, rapid prime, whatever. Yeah, like that's in my memory bank. And I remember it didn't go well with this person. And, uh, and this is what I did. Well, that doesn't mean you're still going to get it right. So you might have to pull out the next one and the next one, the next style and adjust a little bit. But that's why I say when you break leadership down into a relational model, we all know what relationships are, good and bad. We've had them. We know when we argue with the person closest to us, and then we have a good relationship with them. And so you have enough empathy and care to say, all right, yeah, this happened. I'm going to walk away and go back and, going to figure out, I'm going to calm down. I'm going to figure out where they were coming from. Maybe I didn't stop and listen. Maybe I need to go and ask some questions now to them calm. That's all relationships, right? That's how, our kids, like I've heard officers say, hey, it's not my job. They come to work. I'm not here to be their friend. I don't need to have a relationship with them. Well, if you want to destroy trust and accountability, again, personalities are different though. You can be one of the most hardcore people out there, but you're consistent about it, but you show you, and I can think of a number of people, I won't put their names out there, but they were still great leaders. They were gruff or whatever, but you knew they cared and they were going to come to bat for you. And they were going to call you out and say, this isn't good because, so let's try to make it better. So I think we insert so many personalities into it and go, oh, I don't get it. That guy's really hard. This person's really soft, but they're accomplishing the same thing. That's because you build relationships with people and you understand why they're willing to follow you. And so the theory of followership is getting put into more leadership talk because, you're not a leader if no one's following you. And, they're going to do it out of hierarchical necessity,
Mhm.
but you're not getting the most out of a person. And organizations need to start understanding that all these titles and everything. I mean, we need it from a management style and on the fire ground and in these high pressure situations. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little different than actually leading people, in my opinion.
Yeah, we've all said it 1,000 times, and we've heard it. Just because you've had the collar pins or the badge doesn't make you a leader. Yeah, they're going to listen to you because of the discipline problem.
Mhm.
They don't want to get in trouble, but they don't trust you. They don't. You're never going to have that trust. One of the things that I wrote down that you said, it's extremely important to know how to be a follower before you can ever be a leader. So I tell people you can learn a lot from good leaders and bad leaders. I've had leaders that weren't so good. And the things I learned from them is I'm not doing that, or I'm not going to be that way. And I that's the way I can check myself to make sure I'm not being that way. One of the things that I told my kids when they were young, I said, I'll never just tell you no. I'll always give you a reason why. They helped me do that because they'd ask, hey, can we do this? No. Well, why? And because I said so is not an answer. And if I say no, there has to be a reason behind it. So to be a good follower, before you can ever be a good leader. The other thing was you and I talked about offline, and you had said it here is, we are here to build relationships and for people to come and say, well, it's not my obligation. We are not obligated to be your friend. We are not obligated to X, Y, and Z. When you start throwing things like that, you come across as kind of a dick, and then people are going to pick up on that.
Right.
So, as leaders, as officers, as senior people in the fire service, we do have an obligation to be human to people. We have an obligation to sit down and talk to them if we see that they're stumbling or that they're having problems. I tell people, I said, the moment an older person in the fire service or a retiree comes to the station for a cup of coffee and they start telling stories, shut the hell up and listen to what they have to say, because there's lots of things that they learned along the way that you can pick up on. Because the fire service is always evolving. It was way different back in the 70s. I got hired in the mid 80s and I was working with people that were Vietnam veterans. And when they came into the fire service, things were way different than they are now. So you learn a lot of stuff, but we do have an obligation to be human. Not everybody's going to be your friend. Not everybody's going to be somebody you're going to go out and have a beer with, but that everybody on your shift has to be somebody that you can rely on and that they can rely on you. So that's where it comes into being human. So we talk a little bit of the different styles of leadership that are out there. And like I said, there's dozens and dozens. What are some of the main ones that you see over and over again in your time in the fire service that people use, but they may not have a name for what it is? And sometimes it's a hybrid. It might be a combination of a couple of different things kind of pushed together. But I'm not trying to break it down to be simple, but I know firefighters want to know, well, what is servant style leadership? What is that? What does that look like? What is, this type of leadership or that type of leadership that you have seen along the way that is used more often than not in the fire service?
Like I said, I'll go back to those ones that I talked about. So servant is used a lot, right? A lot of people confuse that with being too nice or whatever. That's not what servant leadership is. To me, servant leadership is the epitome of leader. It's not about you as the leader. It's about your people. And there's a book, I think it's called Level 5 Leadership. It's been a while since I read it, but basically what it's saying is, a leader, when everything's going right, they look out the window and they look at their people and reward them and say, yeah, that's great. They did it. But when something goes wrong, they look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong? You know, And it doesn't mean that you did, but you should always be making that assessment. It's like raising your kids. Well, I've told them over and over not to do that. Why did they do that? And it's very much like from an officer to a firefighter's perspective, it is kind of like raising your kid. They not to put anyone down, but you feel, at least me as an officer, and I think you're the same, you feel an awesome responsibility for these people and to make sure that they go home. And so when you're training and holding them accountable to things, you're not trying to, make them feel little or whatever, but it's very serious because we're in a job where lives and seconds matter, right? So, and that's very much a servant style, just having that care for people and that relationship. And servant leadership goes way back, but, Greenleaf in 1970 was really the father of servant leadership. And at the time, people were pushing back because they're like, nope, a leader is hierarchy. A leader is, you can look at all the studies over the year. It's masculine, it's assertive, it's domineering, it's the smartest person, in the room wins. It's that kind of thing. So servant leadership came up a lot because why do we go into the fire service? Most of us go in to serve. Right. So it's just service is a natural thing. And it gives you that connection to the follower. Why are they willing to follow me? What do I know about them? It helps build that relationship. Transformational leadership is a lot like a pick-me-up. It's a lot like servant leadership, but it's like it's helping someone, it's putting time into transforming them and inspiring them to get to where they want to be. But I always say meet people where they're at so you can take them where you need them to go. But you should never overlook from the followership theory, but where are they willing to go? Like we know there's like people would be extremely hard on career fire threes. But if that's their safe space and they're the best fire three out there and they're always giving to the crew, that's their choice, right? That's like Maslow's hierarchy. Right? They're happy where they're at. They've achieved what they need to achieve. That's where they're comfortable. Not everyone wants to be in that high pressure situation as an officer. And let's face it, that is a high pressure situation. Something goes wrong. At least if you're any kind of leader, you're taking that, you're shouldering that, Then it was situational leadership. And I laugh at some of these theories because it's like, yeah, of course it depends. And it's basically saying it depends on the person and the situation. And even down to one person over a year that you've worked with, it's still situational for them. They may be a stellar employee, but then things happen at home. And, one thing we said a lot, back in the day was, well, you leave everything at home. You can't do that. You're a human being. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that goes back to it's situational, but as a person and a human being, that servant style just fits into it. And then you're trying to pick people up and encourage them, that transformational style. So they blend very nicely. And then you have the 5 exemplary practices of leadership. Kouzes and Posner have been studying leadership probably over 40 years now. And they look at all the styles, they look all around the world, all types and sizes of organizations. And there's always these top 5 things that come up. They may not come up in order, like maybe humility is number 1 in the United States and number 2 in Japan, but they all cluster together. There's really about 10 of them. And then they all go back to the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, leading with the heart. Now, not a heart that you're going to give everyone a hug, but putting others first, taking the time to listen to them, encourage others to act, right? When you hear it, you're like, there you go. That's transformational. It all comes together. It's also servant because you're putting that person first, so on and so forth. Challenging the status quo is one of theirs. And that doesn't mean that stick it to, the man or whatever. It means that the only way to grow, innovation is a wonderful thing. And we should be encouraging our people to challenge even us as officers. Well, I'm retired now, but you know what I mean. But the challenge has come such a bad word, but it's really not. Like we should all want to be challenged. And we see it in the fire service. We're like, I've done this drill 100 times. Well, 10 years ago, but you got to stay up on it. So you got to continue to do it. And then you nailed it. Leadership is a lifelong journey. You're never going to stop learning. And when you do, you'll lose your effectiveness as a leader. So, I encourage people to look at Kouzes and Posner's 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And to me, it's just it sums every theory up out there without having to even refer back to that theory. And when I talk about these things, I don't talk about them in an academic term, because I learned a long time ago when I was learning and I was all excited. People are like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
So I just kind of talk about it organically because now it all makes sense to me and it works everywhere.
It's important that one of the things you've said a lot of stuff, and I'm going to hit on a few of those things. But the one thing is to talk to people like they're firefighters. You can't be so cerebral that it just, when they tune out, especially if you want them to understand. A lot of articles that you read in fire engineering and whatnot, they're written on a level that people can grasp that information and
Mhm.
and learn from it. If you put something out there because you're trying to show them how smart you are, you're not going to get your point across. They're just going to look at it, yeah, I got smart, but I have no idea what he's talking about. So your point is totally missed. The other thing is like you said, lifelong leadership. And I've told people the day that you think that you don't need to learn anymore is the day you need to hang it up. You need to stop because you're going to become dangerous. The fire service is always evolving. And that's one of the cool things about being an instructor. We travel all over the place with Capital Fire. Even when I go to FDIC and I teach stuff and then I have students tell me stuff and a lot of that stuff is like, oh, I never thought about that, because we're here in the mid Atlantic and this is where I've grown up and this is the fire service that I know, but the fire service is huge and people are doing things differently, whether how they pull a line, how they rack hose, how they throw a ladder, how they force a door, how do they use the tools, to learn those things and then incorporate, it keeps your skills fresh. So you always have to be learning, even from a management style or from a management standpoint. You just can't treat everybody the same because everybody's different. And to be able to continually evolve as you grow as an officer, as a firefighter, whatever. And then one of the things that you talked about in the very beginning here was that, just because somebody wants to remain a backstep firefighter for the rest of their career, there's nothing wrong with that. I made that mistake as a young lieutenant when I asked a fire three, how come you're not going to take the master's exam? Well, I don't want to. And I said, so that's all you're ever going to be is just a firefighter. Like that was a bad thing. And they got a little offended, rightfully so. I was wrong, 100% wrong. And as I grew, I looked at it and said, you know what? You need good firefighters. You need those senior 20-year firefighters that are still riding in the back, driving the ambulance or whatever. For the new people that come in, who do you think's going to see those people on a majority of the calls? If they're not riding the fire engine with you, they're riding the ambulance with those senior people. And those are the ones that are going to correct those little things and making sure that they're not being taken down the wrong, taken down a bad route of patient care or whatever. So you need strong firefighters, strong technicians or masters, strong junior officers, your lieutenants and whatnot. And it's okay if that's where they want to be. They're comfortable. They love driving the fire engine. They don't want to give that up. You need people like that. And don't down them for it because that makes you have now told them, even though you didn't say it, well, you're not worthy, of the position that you're in. That's all you want to be. And, you should be more. And then what you're doing is not good anymore. So I was 100% wrong, even though that wasn't my intent. That's how it came across. And, looking back at that, I was wrong. And I recognized as I became a battalion chief that you need good officers. My guys and gals made me look good every day. And when they ran calls, they were at the point where and I've told this 1,000 times on this show, that they would punish themselves if they did something wrong on the fire ground to the point that they wanted to be perfect or they wanted to be the best on the fire ground that they could be. And that translated into making me look good. Like, oh man, you're really leading those people well. Well, no, realistically, they're just doing their job and making me look good. I have to make small moves, small corrections here and there, but for the most part, they know their job. They make my job easy. And I was forever thankful of that. And those are the lessons that I learned. In the position that I'm in now, it's difficult to bring everybody to the table and to get them to do the things that they want to do. I have to figure out why aren't they? But I praise when I can. The volunteers that are in Frederick, where I work now, they do amazing things. They are making sure that their firehouses are running. They're making sure that their money is being spent wisely. They're doing their best to take care of their people. We struggle with retention. Recruitment is going good, but retaining people, they're doing the best that they can. And the chief officers, the volunteer chief officers, they're probably in charge. And I've said this a million times. I'd say anywhere between 85+% of the time, they're in charge of these incidents. And they're doing a great job. and we're always evolving. So they make our job easier in volunteer services where I work, but I always strive to give them more information or give them more to try to build them a little bit more. Sometimes they don't see it, but my intentions, our intentions are to make sure that they get everything that they need to be successful. And sometimes it looks like we're being harsh, but we're not. We're trying to give them the tools. We want them to succeed because it makes our job so much easier. And sometimes it's thankless, which we get. We're not there for the pats on the backs and the accolades and everything. We're there to make sure that they get what they need and that we are able to provide that for. And it's just learning that going from the operational side and then the different ways to talk to people. I'll tell you, I'm one of the people that sit at the table and don't say a lot at meetings because I want to hear what everybody else has to say. I'm a firm believer that once everybody has finished talking, now I have all that information and then I can process that. I don't, I try my best not to jump in and try to steer a conversation. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I want to hear what's going on because you can pick up so much of what they are experiencing and what they see versus what I think that they see. And it can be pretty eye opening. I know I've kind of went a little off the rails there, but those are just some of the things that I've learned.
So I got to tell you what's neat about you just expressing that helps me make my point about the 5 practices of exemplary leadership that really encompass all those 65 plus. I'm sure there's more now. But what you're talking about and what your office is trying to do is model the way, right? And that's one of your jobs as a leader. And that's one of the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And to do that, you have to encourage others to act. So you stop, you listen to them. It's about them, not you. And you're going to learn from them. I think that was a lot of frustration, just being honest on the job. Like you didn't feel like, at some points it was like, oh, well, you're just this, or you're just that, or you're just a lieutenant, or, you're just a firefighter. And, people don't really mean it, but, again, when you're running through an organization that really hasn't done any formal leadership and say, hey, here's the expectations, let's at least talk about the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And as you go on your leadership journey and you grow and learn, think about it, apply it, challenge the status quo. I mean, and that's what you're doing. That's what you were just talking about. Yeah. Encourage the heart. I'm going to look real quick. Enable others to act, challenge the process, inspire shared vision, and model the way. Everything to me that you just explained wraps all into that, if that makes sense. And that's what I found in my study. And I write about, in the book, all these firefighters were saying it, no matter their rank or time on the job, they were saying all those things. So it was a pretty successful study and I reached saturation. Like everyone was saying the same things. And what was cool though, is the stories behind it that people, whether you're a firefighter or not, the stories that the participants were telling just made it stand out so much more. And that's what excites me about what you said. I mean, to me, and go back and think about it, look it up. You were hitting all those points. It's just a natural thing when you're more of a servant style that puts other people first and you're more interested in their transformation, not just for your gain, but for your crew's gain and for their gain. It all goes back to servant leadership. And then it changes how you're going to deal with it with people. So to me, all those things wrap together nicely. So
Well, I know we're coming up to the end here, but I want to give people the opportunity to get your book, to read your book. So I'll add that in there so people can have a easy click through and buy the goddamn book.
I got it right here. This is what it looks like.
There you go. So I'll definitely have that as to be able to go through. But you and I have talked a lot over the last handful of years, and just a ton of knowledge. Also, I'll link to your business. I know you do some leadership. Or your business talks about leadership and to be hired as a consultant and things like that. And you're doing good things. And it was a big step to say, you know what, I'm going to retire from this, that I've done for a long time and venture into something else. And, it takes a lot of guts and to be brave to do that. So I look forward to watching you succeed And I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I think it's important for people to understand the firefighter aspect of what leadership is, and to know that majority of people out there are hitting the marks, even though they don't know what it's called. That's kind of how I stumbled through it, before I started taking some formal classes and talking to people, and actually talking to people out in the field of what they think a leader looks like. And they know, they just maybe not know what the name of it is, but they know, and they see when it works. So again, I'll put your information up there. And Shelly, I appreciate you coming on the show, and that I'll have all your information out there if anybody wants to get in touch.
Always a pleasure, Dave. I appreciate you. You've helped me a lot of times over the years, and just not too long ago as I try to go into my venture with my podcast, and you're just always willing to help, and I appreciate it.
Do the best. So take care, and we'll see you on your new podcast when that comes out, and we'll get people to start getting that book.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.